The first thing Daniel noticed when he walked up the driveway wasn't the house itself. It wasn't the freshly painted siding or the neatly trimmed bushes lining the walkway. It was the quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with a calm afternoon, but the kind that feels deliberate, like a stage set where every sound has been muted except the one you're meant to hear. He could feel it pressing against him, filling the space between his thoughts, and he realized before he even reached the front door that something about this place was off. And yet he stepped forward, drawn by a strange certainty, the same certainty that had made him scroll past hundreds of listings over the past few weeks until this one caught his attention. Something about the way the sunlight hit the windows in the photos, the way the kitchen seemed open but private at the same time, it all spoke to a future he had been imagining for years, a life that finally felt within reach. Daniel Mercer had never taken risks without reason. At 38, he had built a life structured around predictability. He worked for a telecommunications company in Phoenix, Arizona, in a job that required focus and patience but paid enough to keep him comfortable. He rented a modest apartment, drove a reliable car, and had spent more than a decade quietly saving money, calculating every expense with the care of someone who knew exactly what they wanted and refused to settle for less. Buying a home had been a distant dream, one he had imagined but always deferred because the timing was never right. Yet this listing felt different. The property appeared deceptively simple in the listing: 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a renovated kitchen, and a backyard that, according to the photos, caught the afternoon sun perfectly. The price was lower than what Daniel expected for the neighborhood, but not so low that it triggered immediate suspicion. It was one of those rare opportunities that seemed almost tailored to him. The seller's name listed was Michael Reeves, and a phone number accompanied the listing. Daniel hesitated. He had trained himself not to act impulsively, but something about the listing's quiet promise pulled him in. When Daniel called the number, Michael's voice answered, calm, deliberate, with a tone that suggested competence without arrogance. Michael explained he was helping a client who had relocated and needed a quick sale. His responses were measured and precise, answering every question Daniel had without hesitation or ambiguity. After a 20-minute conversation, Daniel agreed to schedule a viewing. The clarity in Michael's tone, combined with the effortless confidence he projected, made Daniel feel as though he had already stepped inside the house in his mind. When he arrived at the property 2 days later, Michael was waiting beside a black SUV, wearing a navy blazer and gray slacks. His presence had a subtle authority, the kind you notice not because of what someone says, but because of the way they move and occupy space. Daniel followed him into the house, where the sunlight spilled through the windows just as it had in the photos. Everything looked pristine: polished floors, clean walls, and an air that seemed unusually still for a home that had supposedly been vacant. Daniel moved from room to room slowly, cataloging every detail, imagining the way his furniture would fit, the way his mornings would feel in this light. Michael observed silently, only answering questions when asked, creating a sense that the space belonged to Daniel long before any paperwork was signed. They sat at the kitchen counter afterward. Michael spoke of other potential buyers, but emphasized the advantage of a direct, rapid transaction. He produced documentation that appeared legitimate: ownership records, tax statements, identification forms, and walked Daniel through every page. Each piece reinforced the illusion of certainty, the sense that everything had been carefully verified. By the end of the meeting, Daniel felt the mixture of anticipation and cautious excitement that only comes when a long-awaited goal finally seems attainable. That night, he returned home and found himself staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the thought of the house. He imagined mornings filled with sunlight, evenings in the backyard, weekends hosting friends. Every detail he had visualized during the viewing replayed with unsettling clarity. By the next morning, Michael called again, subtly reminding him that time was limited if he wanted to secure the property. Daniel didn't hesitate. He authorized the transfer, directing the funds as Michael instructed, a process that felt normal because every step leading up to it had been carefully constructed to feel normal. The payment left his account, representing nearly 12 years of calculated saving. When Michael confirmed receipt, Daniel allowed himself a sense of accomplishment,
telling himself he had finally achieved what so many others seemed to reach without struggle. That evening, he visited the house again. The key worked perfectly, the rooms were exactly as he remembered, and he walked through each space imagining the life he had bought. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that certainty could last. But 2 days later, the calls stopped, texts went unanswered, emails were ignored. Daniel drove to the office address Michael had provided, only to find an empty suite in a building that otherwise appeared active. Confusion turned to tension, and tension slowly ripened into a grim understanding. The house wasn't for sale. The documents were fake. Michael Reeves never existed in any meaningful, traceable way. Returning to the house, Daniel encountered a woman he hadn't expected to see. She informed him quietly that the property was owned by her parents and had never been sold. Showing her the key and the documents did nothing to convince her otherwise. The sense of accomplishment he had carried evaporated instantly, replaced by a gnawing awareness that he had been ensnared by a carefully constructed deception. The police advised him to file a report, but the investigation quickly revealed the depth of the scheme. Michael's digital footprint was minimal, his banking arrangements routed through multiple accounts to obscure the trail, and his personal identity appeared to be fabricated from publicly available information. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel's routine, once steady and reliable, fractured under the weight of repeated reflection. He read articles, case studies, and other victim stories, trying to understand the mechanics of the scheme. He realized that what had happened to him was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger network of frauds targeting trusting individuals through patience, preparation, and psychological manipulation. Each new fact he discovered added layers of understanding, but it also amplified the sense of vulnerability that had taken root in his life. Through all of this, a persistent realization emerged. The loss was permanent. Recovery would require a different kind of work, one not measured in simple arithmetic, but in vigilance, awareness, and the slow reconstruction of trust. Daniel began documenting everything meticulously, creating a timeline, collecting records, and searching for patterns in the way Michael, or whoever he truly was, had operated. The detective assigned to the case acknowledged the sophistication of the scheme and the difficulty of tracking someone who moved quickly and anonymously across state lines. Daniel became almost obsessive in his study, spending hours reviewing the original correspondence, noting every subtle pattern, every unusual detail he had previously overlooked. Slowly, he began to see a rhythm in the chaos, a pattern in Michael's digital activity, the timing of responses, the inconsistencies in certain phrases that might indicate something about his location, schedule, or identity. It was not hope, it was strategy. By this point, Daniel's life had changed fundamentally. The house was gone, the money was gone, yet what remained was a drive that bordered on a fixation. He had been taught that experience was measured by success, but now he understood that experience was also defined by survival. The lessons from this event, brutal as they were, began to inform the way he approached not just property, but all decisions. He learned to recognize signs of manipulation, to question appearances, and to trust verification over intuition.